Did it snow? Yeah.
It's good to see you all, and thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of this conference, for many of you. Thank you for being a part of Intersections. I'm beginning to put some faces with some names. Tim and I had the good privilege and honor of working with so many people in this room. But some of them, we were trading emails and voicemails and all sorts of things, but I had yet until today, had not yet put faces with some of the names, and so I'm really appreciative to see some of you. And we really look forward to the next few days. Look forward to the conversations that will be begun here and to all the opportunities that will extend from this conference. So welcome to Nashville, Music City. I hope you have the opportunity to explore Nashville a bit while you're here. It really is a wonderful city with a great deal of history, some wonderful music. I can remember I lived in Nashville, it's been 20 years ago. My wife and I actually met in Nashville. But I can remember from all the way back at that point, I could go in any hole-in-the-wall place in the city of Nashville, and I could find the best live music that I had ever seen. And so hopefully you'll have the opportunity to explore and to visit some of the sites in Nashville, and if you do, I think you'll really, really enjoy it. So, my name is Mark Hanshaw. For some of you, you may have known me in a previous incarnation. I used to be associated with Texas Wesleyan University in Fort Worth, Texas. There I served in a role as faculty member and also as dean. I've now changed roles and now am serving as Associate General Secretary of the General Board of Higher Education and Ministry, which is located here in Nashville. It's a part of the United Methodist Church, and it is the office and the agency that oversees our connection of United Methodist institutions. And so I welcome you as a colleague, and I also welcome you on behalf of GBHEM, and I'm going to be saying a little bit more about what GBHEM does in just a moment. But before I get there, I do want to offer a couple of introductory observations. First of all, in case you didn't notice, over here on the side we have a table and it is filled with books. Books that we don't want to take back to our office. And so, at this table are 3 books, 1 copy for each of our guests here for the conference. The Intersections volume, which looks like this, and which we're going to be referring to over the course of our weekend together. Also, the most recent volume by Wesley Ariaraja, and we are thrilled to have Wesley as a part of this conference and as a contributor to the Intersections volume. And he's going to be speaking in our plenary session tomorrow at lunch. And then the 3rd volume, Interfaith Leadership by none other than Eboo Patel, who is with us this evening, who will deliver our keynote address. And so we feel greatly privileged to have Eboo as a part of this conference and as a contributor to this volume. And so I hope that you will make your way to that table at some point this evening or tomorrow and collect your copies of each of these volumes, because I think you'll find them very interesting, hopefully inspiring, and I believe that they really do offer some good resources for our engagement on campuses relative to interfaith. So as we begin, I want to first of all offer a couple of words of thanks. First of all, to Eboo for being a part of this conference. Eboo is a friend. Eboo is a prominent spokesperson on issues related to interfaith, and Eboo, I think, is someone that probably all of us can learn from and draw inspiration from. So this evening, Ibu is our keynote speaker, and I know that in that presentation, you'll find a lot of rich and rewarding insights relative to the impact that interfaith engagement can have on our college campuses and beyond. As well, Wesley Ariaraja, as I mentioned a minute ago, he's not yet here. His plane was delayed, but he is on his way. Wesley Ariaraja is really, I think, one of the most important Methodist spokespersons on the issue of interfaith engagement. He served as the Deputy General Secretary of the World Council of Churches and as a faculty member at Drew University. Likewise, we are really pleased to have him as a contributor to the volume and also as a part of this conference, and he'll be speaking to us tomorrow at lunch. And then Reverend Mark Forrester, the chaplain at Vanderbilt University. Is Mark here? I don't see him. Mark has been so gracious as to make available space for us at Vanderbilt, and we are really appreciative of that. And I hope if you do see him, if you cross paths, you'll express your thanks for what he's done to help make this conference possible. A couple of other folks I want to thank before we begin. All of the contributors to the Intersections volume. Over the last year, it's been a real pleasure working with the 14 different authors who contributed to this volume in various pieces. This volume took shape really as a sort of labor of love. It was originally envisioned by Tim Moore, and I'll give Tim credit. And Tim and I had the opportunity to speak about this really in a very nebulous conversation early on, and the fruits of our original conversations are not only a volume but also this gathering, and so we're pleased about that. The various contributors to the Intersections volume are listed there, and of course I have to thank specifically Tim as my co-editor on this volume for all of the work that we did together and all the time that we invested, and it was a wonderful working relationship. So Tim, thank you. Also, again, I want to thank GBHEM, the agency that I work for now, for its sponsorship of this conference. Without GBHEM, we would not be here today, and so I'm very grateful for their investment in the conference. I should also say that the volume is actually published by the GBHEM publishing house. We have an internal publishing house, and that publishing house produces volumes related to Methodism and Methodist scholarship, and it is becoming a very prominent publisher, and so we're proud of the work that the publishing house does, and of course it is the publishing house that was responsible for putting the pieces of the volume together. Also, I would be remiss if I didn't thank my colleagues at GBHEM for their hard work making this event possible. One of them is sitting right in the back there, Matt Charlton, and I point him out because if you have any questions over this weekend, if there are any challenges that you confront or any restaurant recommendations perhaps that you desire, any of those sorts of questions that you may have, I would welcome you to please direct them to Matt. He has a wealth of knowledge. You can also direct them to me, but I'm not nearly as knowledgeable on the local Nashville scene as Matt. And so certainly you'll want to use him as a resource. Also, Amanda Allen, who I don't think is here but will be with us over the weekend. Kathy Armistead, who is the publisher in our publishing house, and I think she'll be with us at some point over the weekend. And Steffi Meisner, who was just outside. You may have seen her as you were checking in. She'll be with us throughout the weekend as well. So all of these individuals have really helped pull this conference together, and I'm appreciative appreciative to each of them. So, as we begin this weekend together, one of the things we'd like to do is sort of establish goals. And our goals for this conference and our goals for the volume that preceded the conference were to help initiate a discussion amongst not only United Methodist institutions of higher education, but also institutions of higher education across our landscape on issues related to interfaith engagement. We hoped to, through this conference, provide a resource that would be helpful to students, administrators, faculty members, campus ministers, and others on interfaith engagement. We wanted to provide a record of some of the things that are taking place on United Methodist campuses, and we certainly wanted to encourage ongoing collaboration. So we are here really to become and to place ourselves as a resource amongst our institutions to encourage greater dialogue on issues of interfaith and greater collaboration on common projects. So that brings me a little bit to take a couple of minutes to talk just very briefly about the agency that I work for, the General Board of Higher Education and Ministry. So what is GBHEM and what purpose does it serve? Well, you'll see in some of the images there, you'll see some images associated with some of the work that we do. GBHEM for the United Methodist Church is considered a leadership training hub. We are the liaison between the 119 United Methodist schools, colleges, and universities across North America and the 1,000, more than 1,000 educational institutions that are located across the globe that are affiliated with the Methodist Church. As well, we are a resource for the 1,300 United Methodist campus ministry programs located across the globe. We provide resources to support clergy in the candidacy process. Within the scope of our agency, we have the Division of Ordained Ministry, which provides guidance related to the ordination process within the Methodist tradition. We have a group called NASCM, which is the National Association of Schools, Colleges, and Universities within the United Methodist tradition. And NASCM brings together the presidents and other leading executives of our United Methodist schools, colleges, and universities across North America. We also oversee the University Senate. How many of you are familiar with the University Senate? Have you ever heard of this body? Yeah, a few. The University Senate is actually the body that oversees the affiliation of Methodist universities with the church. It is a body designed to provide guidance and oversight, and it is actually the oldest accreditation body in North America. Many people are not familiar with that fact, but the University Senate of the United Methodist Church actually preceded all of our regional accreditors. And so the University Senate sends teams to United Methodist campuses on a rotating basis every 10 years, just like the regional accreditors. And on those visiting team visits, the University Senate seeks to consult with our member-affiliated institutions and to provide guidance and also to help our member institutions ensure that they are maintaining integrity. Beyond this, our agency has 10 hubs located around the globe, and these hubs provide us opportunities to be engaged with institutions and individuals all around the globe. our most recent hub that was opened in Mozambique, and we're having the official opening of that hub in October. So that gives you a sense, perhaps, of the global reach of GBHEM. And GBHEM, as I said, is an agency of the Methodist Church. And so within the scope of the Methodist Church, there are a number of agencies that provide guidance in a number of different areas. GBHEM's particular focus is on higher education and ordained ministry. And so to that extent, GBHEM becomes the connection with many of our higher education institutions directly to the United Methodist Church. And for that reason, the United Methodist Church, of course, is very prominent on most of our campuses. And today we are here to focus attention on the topic of interfaith engagement. And there's a rich history between the United Methodist Church and interfaith opportunity. And in some ways, it dates all the way back to John Wesley. For those of you who are familiar with Wesley, you'll, of course, know that he is the founder of Methodism. And John Wesley really was, for his time, quite an individual spokesperson for rights of those who were perhaps in communities in positions of challenge. And so John Wesley was a champion of religious freedom and an early opponent of slavery. And so when we look at John Wesley, even though he's a product of his era, and so we think back to the latter part of the 18th century, we may well realize that John Wesley lived in a different environment, and that was an environment that had different values. Still yet, John Wesley laid an interesting foundation for what would emerge as the engagement by the Methodist Church in the area of interfaith opportunities and conversations. So I wanted to share with you, as we began this time together, just a little bit of the foundational ideals that we find within the Methodist tradition through the documents that serve as the guide for Methodist institutions. And these kind of help us understand how the Methodist Church and its various appendages, including its higher education institutions, may look upon the topic of interfaith engagement. And first of all, I wanted to share with you just a brief quote from the Social Principles. Now, the Social Principles are essentially a codified statement of values of the United Methodist Church. And in the Social Principles, you will find this statement: we assert the right of all religions and their adherents to freedom from legal, economic, and social discrimination. Further, in the Book of Discipline, which is the sort of guidebook for the Methodist tradition, you'll see an emphasis upon the establishment of interfaith engagement, an emphasis upon interfaith engagement that is supposed to be carried out through each annual conference. And so in the Book of Discipline, we are advised that each annual conference, which is the regional areas in which the territories of the globe have been divided by the Methodist Church, and each annual conference is overseen by a bishop. Each annual conference is to establish, quote, appropriate structures related to interreligious relationship. So we begin to see sort of the beginnings of framework within the Methodist structure that invites interfaith engagement. Now, the Methodist Church, as you know, is a global church. And as we look further into some of the documents that guide our church and its various appendages, we will also find something called the Book of Resolutions. And the Book of Resolutions acts as an extension of the Book of Discipline. And in the Book of Resolutions, there is a particular policy that is entitled Called to be Neighbors. And in that statement provided by the Methodist Church, we find this quote: "United Methodist Christians, not just individually but corporately, are called to be neighbors with other faith communities and to work with them to create a human community, a set of relationships between people at once interdependent and free, in which there is love, mutual respect, and justice." So, as a church, we are called to be engaged formally in the process of interfaith outreach and dialogue. And that takes place through a number of institutions. First, I suppose, and the one that perhaps gets the most attention, it has been established by the Council of Bishops, which is the meeting of the bishops that serve the United Methodist Church. And the Council of Bishops has created an Office of Christian Unity and Interreligious Relationship. That office does trainings on an annual basis in the area of ecumenical and interreligious engagement. And so this becomes a formal process through which Methodists can engage and learn about interfaith opportunities. As well, the United Methodist Church has formal relationships with the World Council of Churches and the Parliament of World Religions. And there is another entity that you might be interested in knowing about called the World Methodist Council, which is the ingathering of all groups around the globe that are affiliated with the Methodist tradition at large. A couple of other organizations that we work with through GBHEM and we help provide guidance to, sort of para-organizations, include IAMSCU, which is the International Association of Methodist Schools, Colleges, and Universities, and also various regional organizations, including AMIHE, which is the African Association of Methodist Institutions of Higher Education, PAMSCU, which is the Pacific Association of Methodist Schools, Colleges, and Universities, and others. I won't list them all. But that, again, helps you understand the ways in which the work of GBHEM and the Methodist Church at large reaches out across the globe and provides a framework within which interfaith engagement can take place. So, our purpose here over this weekend is to think about interfaith engagement, to think about how it's taking place on our campuses and what can be learned, I suppose, from the church at large, from what is happening on our campuses. In 2016, some of you may be familiar with a book that came out. It was called You Lost Me by David Kinnaman. And in that book, David Kinnaman, based on research that he did, he found that about a third of young adults struggle to the point that they become disenfranchised with their own religious faith traditions. They struggle with the perception that church is exclusive. And so there is embedded in this observation perhaps an expression of the yearning by the individuals in our college communities for greater understanding around the ways in which differing faith traditions can and should relate to one another. And within GBHEM, we have the opportunity and we work to try to provide opportunities for engagement across institutions around issues of interfaith conversation and dialogue. And so that is sort of, again, why we are here this weekend for this conference. Now, all of this is sort of background about some fairly dry things in some respects. It is offered to you to help inform you about who the sponsoring organization is, why the sponsoring organization and GBHEM cares about a gathering like this, and why GBHEM has invested in this meeting and the publication of this volume. But all of that precedes our real purpose, which is to be engaged with one another on the topic of interfaith dialogue and interfaith conversation. And so I wanted to open our time together with a story. It's a story stemming from my own experience, an experience that took place in India more than a decade ago on one of my first trips to India. And it involved my meeting with a monk in a Buddhist temple in northern India. So I was in India for various meetings, and while I was there, I had the opportunity to visit one particular temple, and I knew a little bit about the history of the temple, so I was very excited about having this opportunity. It is a temple that is in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, and so this temple includes a monastery, and there were a number of monks who lived on site in this monastery. And so on the day I visited, there were a number of monks out when I arrived, and they welcomed me and greeted me and offered me tea, as they do in India. And they invited me to have the opportunity to sit with the senior monk. And of course, I was very interested in being able to do this. This was something I was quite excited about. So I said, I would love to have the opportunity to sit with a senior monk. So they brought me into a room and they sat me down, and I waited for a few minutes, and eventually the head monk of the community came in and sat across from me. And after a few moments of silence, we began to talk. We began to exchange questions. I was able to ask him about his own experience in the monastery and how he arrived at this place in India, having been born in Tibet. And we had a wonderful and enriching dialogue, and it went on for a while. And after a period of time, he sort of paused, and he looked at me. And he said, "So, are you a Buddhist?" So, you know, hearing this question through my own Western lens, I assumed that, of course, what he was asking about was my own personal history and my own association with some individual religious tradition. And so I proceeded to tell him about my own religious past. I told him about some of the experiences that had led me to the point that I ultimately became ordained in the Methodist Church. I told him a little bit about the Methodist Church, not knowing whether or not he was even familiar with it. And after I had spent several minutes telling him all about my religious history, a silence kind of fell over the room. He sat for a minute. He looked at me, smiled, and he said, "Are you a Buddhist?" So, not fully yet understanding or absorbing the question, I arrived at the assumption that perhaps he hadn't quite understood what I said. And so I proceeded to reiterate the story of my religious past and my experience with the Methodist Church and my affiliation with it. And he was very patient, and he let me say all that I had to say. He smiled. He didn't interrupt. He waited. And when silence again fell over the room, he paused. He looked at me, and he said, "Are you a Buddhist?" What I didn't realize until that very moment was it was beside the point, from his vantage point, whether or not I called myself a Methodist or a Christian or any other faith tradition. That had nothing to do with the question that he was asking. His question had to do with whether or not I saw the world in a certain way. His question had to do with whether or not he and I shared certain perceptions about the environment that we both inhabited. And at that moment, it struck me that religion is greatly benefited through conversation across the traditional boundaries that we build between ourselves. I had learned so much in just that few minutes sitting with a monk. And I reflected on it. I continue to reflect on that exchange now more than a decade later. And one of the questions that has subsequently haunted me that is left over from that exchange is this. Could I ask in a meaningful way the same question about my own faith tradition that the Buddhist monk asked me? If a Buddhist arrived at my own church and sat down before me and we engaged in a wonderful conversation, could I meaningfully ask that individual in the midst of that conversation, are you a Methodist? Or are you a Christian more generally? Would this question have meaning in the context that I understand the practice of the faith? This has really prompted me to rethink my own understanding of my own faith tradition. It has prompted me to rethink the important aspects of the practice of my faith. And it has really prompted me to reevaluate the way in which I see my own religious and spiritual life. And so these are the sorts of conversations of meaning that I think we are all striving to promote on our campuses and amongst our students. I've had the wonderful opportunity to take students all around the globe. A couple of my colleagues are here today, Gladys and Chad, and a student that I advised, Julian. These are individuals who have absolutely, I know, seen the power of some of the interfaith engagements that we've been able to prompt and develop on the Texas Wesleyan University campus over time. These can be amongst the most potent learning experiences that our students have over the course of their university studies. And so it is my great hope that through the conversations that we will have today, bleeding into tomorrow and Sunday, that we will be able to share the ways in which we have enhanced our own campus experiences, the ways in which we have promoted student insight, the ways in which we have helped inspire students on their own spiritual journeys through individual interfaith engagements like this one. I really am pleased that these conversations can be inspired by the General Board of Global Education. I appreciate your patience in the commercial that I had to offer, that I wanted to offer you relative to who GBHEM is and its place in the Methodist tradition. But I really value your presence, as does GBHEM here. And again, we welcome you to Nashville and to the Intersections Conference. And with that, I will consider our conference opened, and I will offer you a little bit of guidance for the weekend. Matt is going to come up here in just a second and add to this list of instructions. But a couple of things I did want to point out to you that relate to our weekend ahead. As you may recall, please do not forget to pick up your copies of the 3 volumes that are located on the table to my right. as well. If you do have questions over the course of the weekend about anything, please seek out Matt, myself, Tim. We are here and we are more than happy to be a resource to you. This evening, our keynote address will be delivered by Dr. Ibu Patel over dinner. The dinner will be on the Vanderbilt campus. Matt is going to give you specific instructions on how to get to the site of the dinner for this evening. There's also maps outside on the front table, so if you'd like to pick one up, please do so. Tomorrow, our keynote speaker for lunch, again, will be Wesley Ariaraja. You will really want to be there and hear from Wesley. He is a brilliant thinker and really one of the great minds of the Methodist tradition, particularly on topics related to interfaith. And so with that, I'm going to invite Matt to come up and offer some further insight and instructions.